Boys, showgirls, on your tush. Thank you very much. Right, now, thanks to the generosity of Jeffrey Moss, we actually have some books to give away here today, and I'd like to really give some awards, I think, for last night's effort. Now, we have a first, a second prize, and a third prize. It doesn't really matter, it's all about the effort you put in. I'd like a representative from the Pink Ladies, you know who you are. I know how to remember myself, to come up. Second speaking revenue runner-off, second place goes to the woman, I don't know who she is. Round glasses on and a moustache, and she stabbed pretty much everybody in the room. I don't know who she is, those who stabbed her. The next prize goes to the biggest hat, and this goes to a lady who had I could have stood under it and the rest of my family. She's from Nelson, I believe. Jude! So here we go. Now, of course, we don't like to repeat ourselves, but the next person I'm about to bring up on the stage will be all very familiar to you. And although he struggled to get down here, we had ways and means, and in fact, Captain Rutledge made me dress up in a, she knows I hate dressing up, anyway. She made me dress up in a mermaid's outfit, swim out in a rock, and Port Taranaki and lure him in. So please help me in luring in Brett Rutledge to the stage.
Ever since I've arrived, basically, and I got the opportunity to meet Ross, something's been bugging me the whole time, because Ross looks like someone. And I've been trying to figure out who Ross looks like, because it was sticking in my head and I needed to figure it out. You know how these things stick in your head. And it's a British actor that he looks like. And it's not Johnny Depp. He looks nothing like Johnny Depp, doesn't he? He sounds quite a bit like Johnny Depp, and he's doing a very good job of it. And it was someone like Kenneth Branagh, but it wasn't Kenneth Branagh. I was trying to think who it was. Step out for a second, Ross. Just... It's Eddie Izzard. He looks just like, after Eddie lost all the weight, obviously, he looks just like Eddie Izzard. And now the mermaid outfit begins to make sense.
That's wonderful. Someone once told my wife she looked like a fat Karen Carpenter. So I'll take skinny Eddie Izzard.
I hate those tricky questions. I hate those tricky. Like a fat Karen Carpenter. That's amazing. My wife tries to catch me out like that. She'll say to me, do these blue pants, make me look the size of the house sort of thing, or make me look like the house? And I go, no, of course not. See, that's the right answer. The trick is not to follow it up. That's where I went horribly wrong. But no, of course not. The house isn't blue. I was this close. This close. The last 12 years or so, I've spent working in the corporate market. I basically travel the world and shoot my mouth off. That's my job. I have to keep moving because no country will have me. And I work right throughout New Zealand, Australia, Asia, the United Kingdom, and into Canada and places like that. And I'm constantly moving. I don't travel quite as much as I used to now because I've got the 2 young boys, but I used to fly 20 times a month, every month. It used to be that full on. And one of the first things that happens when you win the World Championship at public speaking is you get people coming up to you and after the praise, which is always nice, I try to explain, look, I have an entirely self-sufficient ego, but thank you anyway. After that, the next thing you get asked, there are 2 things that you get asked. The first thing is, could you help me? Would you be able to teach me how to do what you do? And the short answer to that is no. That's the answer that I discovered very early on. And you know how a lot of world champions and people who achieve things in life, one of the first things they do is they bring out books. Things like, I've never brought one out. And the reason that I've never brought one out until now is because I didn't feel I had enough to say. I didn't feel as if I knew enough about communication to be able to actually comment on it, at least in a book form. Because what I did was I went to the World Championship and competed and won largely on natural talent, if I'm brutally honest. I was just very good at what I did. I had a high natural starting point, higher than most people. And Toastmasters allowed me to hone that and polish it to the point where I could enter the World Championship twice, get knocked out of division in the first year, figure out from that speeches that make people cry don't win. Remember that, because it still applies. Come back the next year and go all the way through and win on the world stage. So to do it in 2 years. I've been in Toastmasters in total, I think, 4 years. So it was a pretty quick journey for me. So I had this natural ability that allowed me to go through and do that. And I didn't necessarily understand exactly how I did it. I kind of did. I knew that I broke a lot of rules. I knew that I did things that other people didn't do, but I didn't necessarily know why. So the next 12 years up until now have been sitting down and figuring out why. What is it that I do? Deconstructing what otherwise might be seen as natural talent and figuring out what other people can learn from that. Because that's the stuff that everyone can do. And that's what I've spent 12 years doing. I think I'm still pretty much the only world champion that works exclusively in the corporate market. Most of the other guys work a lot more with Toastmasters themselves and through those connections. And they have the books and tapes and so on. And they focus on skill and technique and everything else, and they try to teach you what they do. I don't try to teach you what I do because it's my belief that essentially the vast majority of you can't do it. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. It's simply the bell curve. You're talking about a very small percentage of any population that is naturally talented at what they do and has that kind of high skill level. It's not attainable for most people. And it's not realistic to try and attain it. The second question that I always got asked, who do you think is a great communicator? I get asked this all the time. My answer, there are none. Or at least none that are still alive. All the great communicators are dead. Why? Because greatness is unattainable. This is such a massive subject. This is so difficult to do. None of us are that good. All of us make mistakes. All of us screw up. We all have moments of greatness. But on balance, there are plenty of times when we don't do such a good job. And quite frankly, how skilled you are has nothing to do with it. I make plenty of mistakes. Ask my wife, seriously. She'll say, Brett, a great communicator. He's a crap communicator. She'll say it straight away. He's hopeless at home. He's like the mechanic. Fixes everyone else's car, never fixes his own. Never talks, and so on and so forth. Never listens, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Anyway. What does she know? Does she have a world championship? No, she doesn't. All the great communicators are dead, because as soon as you label someone as a great communicator, it's all too easy to tear them down, isn't it? It's all too easy to find holes in the facade. Barack Obama got hailed as this great communicator when he was campaigning for the presidency. What's happened since he's been president? All of a sudden, he doesn't seem to be connecting quite as well anymore. He doesn't seem to be doing quite as much as he promised. It doesn't seem to be working for him quite so much. He's being accused of being aloof, and yet before the election, he was this great man of the people. How did that happen? Did he change? The short answer is no, he didn't. The situation changed. The expectations changed. And whenever that happens, you're judged differently in terms of your communication. So don't think in terms of how do I become a great communicator. What's much more important and much more useful is to think in terms of how can I communicate effectively? How can I have great moments of communication? It's much more realistic, and it's something that everyone can achieve. As soon as you realise one thing, and that is this. I won a world championship in public speaking. I do 200 different voices and characters in total. You heard a few of them this morning. There's a whole bunch more. You want to get John Howard? Former Prime Minister of Australia, Right Honourable John Howard.
My fellow Australians and visitors from across the ditch, can I just say what an absolute privilege and pleasure it has been to have been the Prime Minister of the United States of Australia.
See, I could never understand how a man that short could be Prime Minister for so long. Had a full-length photo of himself in his passport. Family tree was a bonsai. Should have been the Prime Minister. I think he could have learned a huge amount from Julia Gillard. You look at Julia Gillard, the current Australian Prime Minister. Lovely man. Anyway. So I can do things, literally with my voice, that most people in the room wouldn't have any hope of being able to do. Right? Everyone can do a couple of voices, I can do 200, and they can sound like other people. I am arguably the most skilled person in the room when it comes to communication. Let's not have the argument now, let's assume I'm And the only reason that I mention that at all, the only reason, is because when it comes to effective communication, skill and technique don't matter. Skill and technique do not make you an effective communicator. They can't, because technique is only useful if you're highly skilled, and you're not. Nothing personal, it's the bell curve. Statistically, most people in any room will not be skilled enough to use technique effectively, because to use technique effectively, the technique has to be absolutely invisible, doesn't it? You can't see it being used. If I can see that you're employing a technique, good morning, that renders it ineffective immediately. And that's the situation that most people are in. Skill and technique-based approaches to improving communication do not work. They're not designed to make you more effective. They're not designed to make you a better communicator. They're designed to do what? Give you confidence. What's Toastmasters' charter? To make you a more confident speaker. And that's what it does. It doesn't make you better, it makes you feel better about being a bit shy. That's the reality. Now, that's a very, very important first step. That's absolutely vital. And everyone has to go on that first step. But once you have confidence, that doesn't mean you're effective, does it? What's the most common thing we see in the corporate world with CEOs? And that's the level that I tend to deal at. Very confident, articulate speakers who are hopeless. They're boring, they don't connect, you can't remember what they said, you don't even care about what they said. That is the most common situation in the real world. Not the stumbling, nervous, oh my God, I'm getting up in front of a crowd, that kind of person that we often think of in Toastmasters, because that's the kind of person that we're always trying to help, first and foremost. But the person who's been through all of that and still, for some reason, is not effective. So the skill and technique part do not help. That's not the bit you need to focus on. Once you have your confidence, it's all about something else, and it's this. Cate Blanchett is an Academy Award-winning actress. Why? Why?
Because she's good.
Because she is talented. Yeah. Why? What is it specifically about her that allows her to be an Academy Award-winning actress? She's believable. Why is she believable? Natural. She doesn't look like she's acting. That's why she's so good. She literally doesn't look like she's acting. So you believe her in every role she's playing, even though you know, watching her on the screen, that she's an actress. That's talent. Now, would it matter how long any of us went to acting school? Me included. Would it? No. Most of us haven't got a hope in hell of achieving that kind of ability. So this idea of acting, going to acting school, learning how to act, which is what they teach a lot of people in the corporate world, this is just stupid. Because you won't look like that. You'll look like a bad actor. Name some bad actors.
Reagan.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan, Keanu Reeves. Right? You will look fake. You will look awkward. This is the interesting point, though. Can you be a bad actor and still be successful? Yes. Name some really successful bad actors. Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise always comes out and it polarizes everyone. Most of the blokes go, yeah, fair enough, crap. And the ladies go, oh, I don't know. Has its good points. Who else? Yeah, Keanu Reeves. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Hi guys, so pleased to be here. Sylvester Stallone. Hello. There's a reason Stallone doesn't do Shakespeare. You imagine Stallone as Hamlet. To be or what? Yes, he looks good. But this is the interesting thing. Why are these bad actors so successful? In fact, arguably, the bad actors are the most successful actors. Why? Exactly. They only ever play one part. They always play themselves. Has Hugh Grant ever been anyone other than Hugh Grant? No. Has John Wayne ever been anyone other than John Wayne in any movie he's been in?
Never.
They play themselves. And we like the person they're playing. And all we want to do as a paying audience is see that character just shoved into different situations. That's why they're so successful. Because we like them. Because they play themselves. What's the lesson for everyone here? Be yourself. If you're not Kate Blanchett, your only option is to be yourself. Everything else will look crap. And will look fake. One of the most common things that people say to me is, oh, you're so natural on stage. Well, that's because for the most part, I am just being myself. I really am this bad. I really am this non-PC and everything else. Right? So that's one of the key things you have to learn from a communication point of view in leadership. First and foremost, you must be yourself. We love people who are genuine, and that's all we ask of them. For the most part, the best speeches you have ever heard did not come from people like me. They did not come from professionals. They came from people amongst your friends and family who spoke at a funeral, or spoke at a wedding, or a 21st. And they were probably clumsy and awkward and technically hardly proficient. But they were genuine. And they spoke from the heart, and you loved them for it. And in leadership positions, unlike here when you come into Toastmasters and you're competing and you're getting up and doing your speeches and receiving evaluations and so on, in leadership positions, when you're communicating with people, you're not actually judged on your skill or your technique. First and foremost, you're judged on how real you are. Can I trust what they're saying? Do they believe in what they're saying? Is this a real person in front of me? Are they genuine? So that's the first part of the equation. If you want to be an effective communicator, then you have to be genuine. You have to be yourself. There are no other options. Don't even bother trying. Go with the person who got you there. You all do it at home, do it everywhere else. So I often say to the guys that I work with as CEOs, let's be perfectly honest here. If you spoke to your friends and family the way you talk to half the people at work, they'd think you were a wanker, wouldn't they? And most of them are having the kind of reaction that you're having now. Yeah, probably. And the follow-up question stops them laughing. So why do you think the people at work think any different? I have this theory that a lot of people in leadership positions, and you see it in Toastmasters as well, thrust into the role of Toastmaster or something like that, or the meeting chair and so on. They have in their head a certain way they think they are supposed to sound. and a certain way they think they are supposed to look that's commensurate with their role. And because they're not Kate Blanchett, they walk around for years on end doing a really piss-poor impression of whatever that is. And the only thing that we know for real is that it's not real. And how many times have you sat in a meeting where someone's got up that you know personally, and that you've seen in the meeting off and on and chatted with, and maybe you're friends with outside of Toastmasters, get up and they become the Toastmaster, and you just sit there going, what are you doing? Why are you talking like that? You don't talk like that normally. Why are you using those words? No wonder you're stumbling over them. It's the first time they've ever come out of your mouth. You don't need to change who you are. Just be yourself. You can still bring everything that the role requires, even if you're playing a character. Like our good friend Captain Silvertongue, is that your official name? I reckon the name you wanted to go with was much better. Was it Foulwind Jackson? See, we're on the outside looking in, let's be honest. The ship last night, I wanted to name ours the Sphincter. Not doing that, they said. Why would you call it the Sphincter? I said, we've got a tight crew. Just take a moment and clench. I'm the one going to hell, you're just watching. So first and foremost, you've got to be yourself, and you've got to get rid of this idea that you have in your head that for some reason you're not good enough as who you are. You are, you're fine. Any role that you're playing, you're fine. Just be yourself, be genuine. People will love you for it. The rest of it is actually about structure. It's not about the skill and delivery stuff. Most of what we teach in Toastmasters is actually not true. In the sense that either it's just out and out wrong, or it's only true in certain situations, in certain applications. You take some of the most basic things that we teach people in order to build up some confidence. Eye contact. What do we say to people? Always maintain eye contact with the person. Sure, unless you're talking to Pacific Islanders. Then maybe not such a good idea to zeroing on them. I'm talking to you, you go. One of the other guys was saying, yeah, even simple things like handshake, we say squeeze firmly. Now there are certain cultures where squeezing someone's hand like that would be offensive. See, the rules change depending on who you're talking to, depending on where you are. So they're there to give you those clear parameters so that you can feel a bit more secure and that you can grow and learn and try things out. But out in the real world, stuff changes. And those rules are there to be broken a lot of the time. And that's knowing when and where to apply it. Despite everything you've ever been told, when it comes to communication and leadership, content matters more than delivery, full stop. The greatest orators in the world are proof of this. Name some great orators, people that you consider well there. Mandela, yeah?
Churchill.
Do Mandela for you. When I first learned the power of this from Robert Island prison. You know, look at them. Mandela, go back further in time. Martin Luther King. Churchill. Lincoln. Cicero. Yeah, Hitler. Not taking his day. Alright? All great orators. But here's the interesting thing. Have you heard them speak? No. For the most part, you haven't. Most of us haven't, even those that we have heard speak, we haven't heard the whole speech, we've heard bits of it. We've heard Martin Luther King say in little news clips, I have a dream. And that's about it. We haven't heard the rest of the speech. We actually haven't judged them as great orators on their speaking ability at all. Lincoln had a crap speaking voice. Apparently really whiny and high-pitched, quite unpleasant to listen to. The reason that we consider them great orators is because we've read the speeches. It's the words that make them great, not necessarily the delivery. Shakespeare, by that definition, is a great orator. Content matters more than delivery. Getting that right is really what everything is about. In the World Championship, think about this. What wins? The best delivery or the best speech? You've got 8 or 9 people up there, more or less, all of the same ability in terms of delivery. They can all do the individual components that we've been taught. There's not a lot to differentiate them in that regard. It's actually the speech that wins, as long as it's delivered. Is this making sense so far? All right. So, it's all about the content, it's all about the structure. It's about learning how to put that together properly and making it work. The great news about that is that's a relatively simple thing to do. Everyone can learn that. Everyone in this room can do that. You cannot change your speaking style very easily. There are only two types of people who can completely and convincingly change their speaking style depending on who they're talking to. One, the very highly skilled, world champions in public speaking, that sort of thing. I hate it. The second group, are sociopaths. Now, if you're a sociopath, no problem. I'm not making any moral judgments. I just prefer to be paid up front. If you don't fall into either of those two categories, it's not about changing who you are. It's about changing what you say. And that's something that everyone can do. But you have to understand how to change it. Now, there's a massive communication gap that exists in organisations. This is how big it is. When we survey leaders within organisations and ask them to rate themselves in terms of their communication effectiveness, on average, and it doesn't matter who conducts the survey, whether it's Gallup or Tom Peters or anyone else, 90% of organisational leaders rate themselves anywhere on the scale from somewhat effective to very effective. When we ask the people who work with them, for them, alongside them, to rate those same leaders in terms of their communication effectiveness on that same scale, the percentage that agree that they are anywhere on the scale from somewhat effective to very effective, on average, 25%. That's a big gap. Now, I'm prepared to be generous today. I'm prepared to accept that you people are well above average, that you do not have, within your organisations, wherever you work, you do not have a 65% communication gap. How much above average would you like to be? I don't care, I'm generous. How about 100%? 100%? Comfortable with that? Some of you are thinking, yeah, that's fair. 100%. You're 100% better. So you don't have potentially a 65% communication gap in your organisations from a communication point of view. You only have a 32.5% communication gap. Virtually a third of everything that comes out of your mouth is completely ineffective. Because this is the problem with all this research. The scale's wrong. There's no such thing as somewhat effective. You either are or you aren't. It's like pregnancy. You can't walk in and say, look, I might have got Shaz a little bit pregnant, but jury's still out. It doesn't work that way. So that's a huge gap, isn't it? That's a massive problem. You think about the time wasting that's involved there. You think about the lost opportunities that are involved there. The sheer cost, as you're about to find out. And you think to yourself, why is it that people think that they're so effective when clearly they're not? And the answer is this. Everyone would agree, and I'm sure everyone in this room would agree, that effective communication is probably the most important skill set, if you like, that any leader can bring to the organisation. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Certainly well up there. Be in the top 5, if not number 1. And that's why, because you all agree with that, and you all know how important it is, that's why you'll all be able to tell me what effective communication is. Fire away.
Transfer of understanding.
Sorry?
Transfer of understanding.
Yeah. Laurel is 25% right. A quarter of the equation. Oh, and you've now got another quarter. So we're now 50% there. So you've got understanding. What else do you think?
Listening to action.
Listening. Oh, God. I'm going to have to destroy one of these myths very quickly. All right? Listening. You'll hear a lot of people say the most important skill in communication is listening. Not true. Not true at all. It is important, but it's not the most important. Why is it not the most important? Because no conversation ever starts with listening. Try it. Go on, here we go. I'll do it with Dennis right here. You don't need to do that, you're already there. See, you try doing that, you look like a muppet, don't you? Or some sort of psycho. It's not listening at all, it's talking. The most important skill in communication is the one that we all come to Toastmasters to learn. It's talking. We don't have a crisis of listening in the corporate world, we have a crisis of self-expression. People can't actually say what they mean. They can't mount an argument. They can't tell a story. That's the problem. Does anyone know why listening is important? It's actually a biological reason. We talk, on average, most of us, at between 100 and 150 words a minute, there or thereabouts. We can hear at between 600 and 800 words a minute. That's why you walk into a room at a party, you can pick up 3 or 4 conversations going on at once and know roughly what's happening. So the natural default for the brain, because it's so clever, is to not really pay attention. I've got the gist of it. No worries, I'll read the paper. That's why we teach listening skills, to teach you to focus your listening, because your brain doesn't do that by default. But it's not actually the most important skill. The other reason that I don't like people saying that, because it implies that the responsibility for being understood is on the shoulders of the listener, and that's rubbish. It is always the communicator who has that responsibility. Always. But we're only 50% there. What else? What's missing? Rapport? No, not necessary. Honesty? No, definitely not necessary. Otherwise half the advertising industry would be dead, wouldn't it? Communication. Yeah, well, the definition of effective communication. Okay, now stop for a minute. Right? Think about this. Think about what you're yelling out here. Someone said honesty, someone said clarity, someone said, a few other things, being articulate, and so on and so forth. Who decides whether or not communication is effective? The listener. Yeah. So why are you telling me stuff you have to do? Not relevant, is it? It's stuff the listener has to get or do that decides whether or not it's effective. So what would the listener have to be doing? What do you guys have to do right now while I'm crapping on?
Comprehend.
Interested. Go further. It's got to be more than that. Buy into it, which is about... They have to agree. They actually have to agree with what you're saying. Or at the very least agree with your right to say it. But more typically agree with what you're saying. What's missing though? There's still another factor here. No? No?
Give the customer what they want.
God, no. Why on earth would you do that? You don't work in banking, do you? Sorry? No, not change.
Comprehend.
They have to care. They have to understand, they have to agree, they have to care, and then as a result of all that, they have to take action. Now you think about this for a minute. How do we judge whether or not communication is effective for people? Whether or not they do what we want them to do, right? If someone doesn't do what you wanted them to do, it will always, without exception, be because they either didn't understand, didn't agree, or didn't care. There are no other options. That's it. Just knowing that will change the way you talk to people. It will mean that if something doesn't go right, you know where to go looking for the problem. Murray's looking quizzically at me. Trust me, Murray, there are no other options, and we'll always fall into one of those. Either they don't get it, they don't agree, or they don't give a toss. And we tend to make 4 fatal assumptions when we're talking to people. We assume that they understand what we said. We assume that they think we're right. We tend to assume that they give a toss. And we assume that they're going to do something appropriate as a result. And more often than not, none of these things occur. And the corporate world, and virtually everyone in this room until now, didn't know that that is what effective communication actually is. And as soon as you know that, it doesn't mean you get it right first time. It means you've got a better chance of getting it right second time. You can figure out where you've gone wrong. Because as the communicator, it's always going to be you that's gone wrong. Go back and say, right, I either need to explain this in a different way, I need to mount a better argument, or I need to find something they do care about it and relate it back to that. To a certain extent, the ladies in the room get this. Women do get it. What's the most common complaint women have about their male partners? Don't understand me. Look, can I clear this up? Speaking on behalf of the male organisation, and trust me, we are the foremost authority on women today. Wherever there is a woman, we have a man on the job. Granted, he may not be our best man, but he's there. We do understand you. We understand you perfectly. We get it. We always have. We just don't give a shit. It's all right, I don't expect to be invited back. But seriously, it is always about these things. So the rest of it, structurally, is how do you go about achieving these things? How do you get understanding? How do you get agreement? How do you get people to care? How do you get people to do stuff as a result? And that's the crux of it. And in order to do that, you have to understand how the human brain works and how it interprets and evaluates information. Now, I'm going to probably upset some people here. There are a lot of things that we get taught in communication that we think we know about communication that are just not true. Left brain, right brain. Not true. I know, it comes as a shock. Fundamentally not true. No scientific basis whatsoever. It started off in the early 1880s when they first decided to dissect some brains, human brains. And they discovered that it appeared that certain functions of the human brain seemed to be located in certain hemispheres. For example, they thought that the speech function was in the left hemisphere. This is the equivalent of gathering together 200 people who happen to be right-handed and saying that the world is right-handed. In actual fact, not everyone's functions are in the same parts of the brain. They're spread out. Some people have them in different parts of the brain. More to the point, the brain does not work as a left side and a right side. It doesn't operate that way. How do we know that? A little thing called MRI technology. We can actually map your brain while you're doing stuff. And we shove you in the MRI machine, we get you to complete a task, and what we discover, lo and behold, it's not left brain, right brain, it's a whole brain. Calcipress. And the whole brain works together. And even though certain functions may be located in certain hemispheres of the brain, they have to work together in order to function. When you talk, it's not just your speech function that goes off, is it? It's 3 or 4 other things at the same time as you're processing cognitively. So it's actually your whole brain working together. So all the left brain, right brain stuff that you thought you knew over the years is actually not true. All that stuff that they assigned in terms of right being creative and all that kind of thing, the left being logical, not true. That bit isn't actually even based on dissection. They just made that up. Seriously. Made up. It's based on astrology. So if you think your brain works the same way as the horoscopes in the daily paper, sure, go for it. Most things based on left brain, right brain are not true as well, which includes most types of personality testing. Anyway, that's an aside. In reality, the brain works together. And in terms of interpreting and evaluating information, it looks for 3 things. Very, very simply. Facts, emotions, and symbols. And because it's looking for all 3 things, that means that whenever you're communicating with someone, you have to use all 3 channels of communication. Factual, emotional, and symbolic. So think about this for a moment. What would the factual channel be? What sort of things would you expect to see? It's not a trick question. Sorry? Yeah, data, information. We love this stuff. Seriously, we love it. We are hardwired to think this way. You cannot leave this stuff out. This is why we see faces in clouds. There are no faces in clouds. We're looking for a pattern, and we find it wherever we look. What's the lesson from that? For God's sake, provide the pattern, otherwise I'll make one up. And you will. You can't help yourself. You have to do it. What's the big problem with the corporate world? What are they over-reliant on? Facts, data, information. They just keep dumping it on over and over again. Can you retain that? No. Why can't you retain that? Because they don't provide context, which means what? You don't care. And you probably don't understand. And you may not agree. See how quickly this starts relating back? That factual channel is not about telling people what stuff is. I don't need you for that. I can look it up on my own. That's what Google is for. You have to tell me what it means. It's all about context. Tell me what stuff means. Don't tell me what stuff is. You understand the difference? Because we have this tendency to just want to share all this stuff with people. Because in each and every role that you have, no matter where it is, you are an expert in your own little field. So to you, everything's important. And you have this tendency to want to dump all that information on people, but it's not important to them. Only certain parts of it are. And if you don't explain the context to them, then they don't know why it's important. And if you don't cherry pick the key bits of information, they can't retain it. So that factual channel is vitally important for that reason. The next one is the emotional channel. What's that about? It's easy. Feelings, yes. Two types of feelings. The feelings of the people that you're talking to and your own. You must acknowledge the feelings of the people you're talking to because that allows you to connect with them. Because they think, oh, he gets it, or she gets it, she understands me, they know what I'm about. So, for example, in a certain environment, it might be that they've had a tough year, the global financial crisis. Those of you who work in corporate environments, if you're addressing the troops, probably be a good idea to acknowledge that things have been tough. Because it shows you understanding. It's very simple, it's not difficult to do. But what are we taught to do in the corporate world? Don't show emotion. This is dopey. Because you also have to share how you feel about things. Because that allows people to connect with you. If you don't do that, you run into a very, very big problem. And it's this. Every person that ever comes into contact with you knows that you are a close approximation of a human being. Trust me. They therefore know that you have feelings. If you try to hide your feelings from them, they will attribute emotion to you. They will try to guess at what you're feeling. What are the chances that that will be a positive thing? Give you a clue, it's a round figure. 0. None. They're going to assume one of three things. Either A, you do not care. B, you're up to something, sneaky or malicious. Or C, both A and B. And then they will respond in one of only two ways that human beings respond in that situation. If you are lucky, and I stress, if you are lucky, they will simply disengage completely. Does anyone know what the disengagement figures are for the workforce? 55% of the workforce are disengaged. For those of you doing the math, going, woohoo, 45% are on our side. No, they're not. There's a further 19% that are actively disengaged. In other words, sabotaging the place. We are paying these people to hate us. In the case of the actively disengaged, we are paying them to prove they're justified in hating us. This is the way people are. So they simply disengage, they pull back. That's if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, they pursue you to the ends of the earth because they've decided you are the biggest bastard on the planet and someone needs to make an example of it. Now, a really high-profile example of this in recent times is the James Hardie case in Australia. Remember the asbestos poisoning? So James Hardie, in response to that, they had a whole bunch of workers in the 50s exposed to asbestos, ended up with various asbestos-related terminal diseases. So they see the crisis and they troop out the suits, out the cut. And they take a classic corporate approach. We're going to be logical, cool, calm, collected. We're not going to get emotional. We're not going to be hysterical. We're going to deal with the facts. And out they come. And on the other side of the fence, who is it? Bernie Banton. Bernie is a 70-something-year-old granddad. Bernie's got an oxygen tank inserted into his nostrils. Bernie's dying. Bernie is, in fact, a dead man. It's just a question of how long. So we know that Bernie's not doing it for him, because Bernie ain't going to be around to collect anything. Bernie's doing it for everyone else. Bernie's surrounded by friends and family. They're crying, they're upset, they're emotional. Who does the public side with? They go where the emotion is. Every single time. There was a small group of people who were so upset with the response of James Hardie that they started digging. They happened to be a small group of people who sat in the prosecutor's office. 7 years later, they took the entire board of James Hardie to court. Every single member of that board was found guilty of various criminal offences, and none of them will work in the corporate world ever again. Not because they were guilty of criminal offences. Let's be honest, that's standard practice for a lot of boards in Australia. Pull up the trousers, you can still see the chain marks on the ankles. MCG stands for Massive Convict Gathering. But because someone was upset enough by the lack of work they did in that emotional channel to pursue them for 7 years. That's how important it is. So you must acknowledge the feelings of the people you're talking to. You must show them how you feel. It's that vital. The third one is the symbolic. Now the symbolic's tough. That's hard work. Because the symbolic is actually about everything else. It underpins the emotional channel. It's proof. In an American movie, if there's a vaguely patriotic moment happening on the screen, what is in the background every single time? The American flag. And it's not just hanging there limply, is it? It's fluttering in the breeze, even if it's indoors. Someone switched a fan on or something, and it's fluttering in the breeze. Because it's symbolic of that patriotic moment. That's why it's included. Everything in every movie you watch, think about this, in the background is not there by accident. It's deliberately placed to convey an emotional context. That's how important the symbolic is. Get this wrong, and life is just horrible. One of my favourite examples of people getting this wrong, wedding songs. Who's married? Who had a wedding song? Yeah. Who can still remember their wedding song? Yeah, blokes, put your hand up. Doesn't matter. We just assume we're not going to get quizzed about it. Shunt the problem to later, not right now. Okay? Now, obviously, if you were having a wedding song, you wouldn't have something by Queen, would you? Like another one bites the dust, and another one, and another one, another one bites. Because that'd be idiotic, wouldn't it? You look at that and you know playing Another One Bites the Dust at your wedding would be stupid. Wouldn't it? So no one would do anything that dumb, would they? Until you look at the 10 most popular wedding songs around the world. And sitting in the 10 most popular wedding songs are songs like Every Breath You Take by Sting and the Police. You know the one? Every breath you take, every move you make, every breath you take, every move you make, I'll be watching you. It's about a stalker! Seriously, it's a bloke in a tree with a pair of binoculars.
What else in the other? And yes, what we do all the time
is include these sorts of things. Right? Another one of the 10 most popular songs in weddings is I Will Always Love You. Whitney Houston did it, you know, Dolly Parton before that. It's a breakup song. Wake up, people. Theme to The Bodyguard. What happened to Kevin Costner in the movie? He gets shot. Another one of the most popular wedding songs. My Heart Will Go On. Celine Dion. Theme tune to the Titanic, sung to the dying boyfriend as he slips beneath the waves, a frozen corpse. And as the bride's coming down the aisle dressed in white, people are looking around behind thinking, looks a bit like an iceberg, doesn't it? Hope for the best. It's wrong, isn't it? It's a disconnect. It's wrong. And even if you don't realise why it's wrong, you will know that it's wrong. Am I the only one that thinks that Titanic could have been so much more interesting as a movie if Arnold Schwarzenegger was in Leo DiCaprio's role? That would have been different.
Don't let go, Rose. Whatever you do, don't let go. Oh my God, the boat is breaking up. Go to the top, hang on to the railing. I'm going to the middle.
Getting too animated. It's very, very easy to make these mistakes. Look, at the back of the room, I'm not picking on them, I'm just pointing out how easy it is. There is a banner in that back corner from one of our lovely sponsors. Right? That sponsor's name at the bottom, and they're a surveying company. And the sponsor's name at the bottom, the name of their company, is Bland Howarth Jackson. Now, normally you think, how do we solve this problem? We've got 3 partners, alphabetical order. Let's go for that. Not when it creates a fragmented sentence. Not want the exciting Howarth Jackson. You can't have him. We've got the bland Howarth Jackson. That's all you get. On that banner is a photo of a surveyor. Have a look at his face before you leave today. He looks worried. He looks concerned. Wouldn't you want your surveyor to look at calm, in control? He's either constipated or he's looking through a survey machine and go, oh, oh no. Oh, what have done. Right? Simple things like this. Now I'm being deliberately subversive, but it shows you just how easy it is to arrive at a completely different conclusion from what is intended. That's what that symbolic channel does. It trips companies and individuals up every single time. Nike, for example, what do they make? Sports shoes. Who for? High-end athletes. Really important big noters who earn heaps and heaps of money. Where do they make them? Sweatshops in Thailand. That's a problem. That's a disconnect. Symbolically, they're undermining everything else they do in the factional emotional channel. It undermines the quality of the shoes, potentially, in your head. It certainly undermines that idea of high-end achievement when you're using kids in a sweatshop to make the things. If Walmart had done something like that with their clothing, that wouldn't be anywhere near as big a problem, because Walmart are about cheap. So you kind of expect it. You may not like it, but it wouldn't hurt their brand anywhere near as much. Is this making sense? This channel is vital, and it's all pervasive. It's everywhere. And if you don't marry these up, if you don't have alignment, if you leave something out or you get something misaligned, the brain is looking for these things. So what it will do is it will fill in the gap itself. And that's how people arrive at all sorts of weird and wacky ideas and conclusions about things you're trying to tell them. You've all got examples of that. Make sense? Okay. So what I want you to think about is not getting fixated on the surface display stuff. Not getting fixated on things like body language, which incidentally is 50% wrong. It is. Obviously, we all use body language to try and convey meaning, don't we? The idea that you can interpret body language when you know nothing about the person, and you don't know them personally and fairly intimately, is silly. Why? There is no universal meaning for this. None whatsoever. Even before you get to other countries and cultures, just in your own, no universal meaning. Body language, people tell you this is defensive. Could be. It's entirely possible. Could also be I'm cold. Could also be that I'm comfortable. Dad did it for 40 years, I don't even realise I'm doing it. It could be that an attractive woman's just walked past, I'm showing off the biceps. Sucking in the gut. How you doing? It could be that my left hand is deformed, I'm embarrassed by it, this is my way of hiding. Unless you know me, you have no idea what that is. So don't get sucked in to all of these little techniques and tools that people try to teach you, or more to the point, sell you. Think about the basic structure. I need to get understanding, I need to get agreement, I need to get caring, I need to get them to do something as a result. In order to do that, I have to have facts and information and data, I have to give that meaning, I have to encase that in some sort of emotional context so that they can see I understand them and they can connect with me. I have to give them the symbols, the stories, the ideas to convey it with. In speech, the symbolic channel is metaphor, storytelling. It's absolutely vital. You must tell stories, wherever you are. The number of people who try to explain things in the corporate world without using stories and metaphors and analogies, incredible. It's really, really difficult to do. In reality, this is what each of these things become. That is more or less your message, whatever it may be. Around that goes the emotional channel. That's a reason to care. And around all of that is the symbolic, and that is a way to remember. And that's all it is. Because this is the way it works in real life. Who's got a photo of something personal sitting in their office? Maybe a family member, something like that. Right? What happens when you look at that photo? It's the very first thing that kicks off in your head. An emotional response. Oh, darling boy, I love you. What does that allow you to do? Access factual information. That's the way it works in reality. The symbolic stuff allows you to remember something, it triggers an emotional response, that in turn allows you to access the data and information that you've been taught. It's called a communication loop. When you see them in action, they are incredibly powerful. I'll give you a very quick example before I wrap up. 9/11, what happened? Yeah, Twin Towers, they fell. How many planes? You returned to the Twin Towers for total. Where'd the other planes go? Yeah, Pentagon, where else? Deerfield. How many terrorists involved, roughly? 20, about 18, yeah. How many people died? 3,000, close enough, yep. Look at the recall you have. I'm assuming none of you were there. I hope none of you were there. I'm hoping that none of you knew anyone that was there. In very personal terms, it had nothing to do with any of us. Yet look at the recall we have from something that happened, how many years ago now? 9 years ago. And all I said was 9/11. 2 words. If you could have that kind of recall from something that happened last week at work, you'd be ecstatic, wouldn't you? And it's because that event was reported thoroughly in all 3 channels. Now, for those of you who think, oh, he's picking on a world event, that's why we can all remember it. December 3rd, 1983, what happened? Don't know. I'll give you a clue. India. Give you another clue. Bhopal. Union Carbide. Gas leak at the Union Carbide plant. 3,000 people dead in the first 30 minutes. 100,000 people dead, maimed or injured in the years since. Still to this day, trying to extradite American executives from Union Carbide to face charges of gross negligence in India. They can't do it. World's worst industrial accident. Who thought it was Chernobyl? Why? Because it wasn't reported in all 3 channels. There aren't a lot of symbols like you have at 9/11. You don't think of firemen's helmets lying in the dust like you do with 9/11. You don't remember the priest being carried to the church, the first official death of 9/11. You don't have any of that for Bhopal. So it's much, much harder to access this stuff that actually was reported. That's the difference it makes. We've only given you the briefest overview of effective communication today. Those understanding things and agreement things and caring things, you can drill down into each of those, and each of those have key components that have to be there as well. But the one thing I want you to take away, effective communication is actually about being holistic in terms of all the information and channels you use. They all have to be there. And more than anything else, and the one thing that you have absolute control over, you just have to be yourself. All we want is someone genuine. All we want is someone that we can believe. All we want is someone that we can see cares and is passionate about what they're talking about. We will forgive an awful lot of other things if that is there. Forget about the surface display stuff. Play in Toastmasters. Experiment. Try things out. It's a great environment to do that. But out in the real world, for God's sake, just be you. Thank you.
Brett, did you notice when I walked out there, everyone stood? It's certainly been a personal highlight of mine, and I'm sure probably 99 to 100% of the crowd, apart from your mum, she's here today, can share the same expression of thanks to have you here, to board our ship this weekend, and to share your humour and your knowledge and your skills with us, and for that we're very thankful. And from the heart of my bottom, I hope to see you again. Now I know you're absolutely just dying to find out who's won the humorous speech competitions. But I'm afraid you're just going to have to wait a little longer. So welcome up to this stage, please, District Governor, Distinguished Toastmaster, Dennis McCord, to announce some very important awards. Dennis.